Hello everybody, so today we're going to be doing an IS200 to ECUMaster Black plug and play patch harness. So let's get into it. So as discussed, we're going to be doing an IS200 ECUMaster Black plug and play patch harness. This is made up of a few things. Obviously you've got your ECU itself over there. We've got our patch harness which leads up to our 122 pin breakout box over here. Now this works for not only the 1G but also the 1UZ VVT-i, 1JZ GTE VVT-i, 2JZ GTE VVT-i, as well as the 2JZ GE VVT-i as well, as long as they have the 122 pin header over there. Now, because that's pushed in there, you can't see the whole harness. So what I'm going to do, first of all, we're going to cut through to the build process and you can see exactly what it looks like buried underneath the ECU box there. So let's do that now.
Never break, always fight, never quit, do it right, play the game.
Right, so now that you've seen what it looks like over there, obviously it is designed to plug directly into your existing harness of your 1G FE or IS200. You can see there we've got the two body plugs that go straight in there. We've got the two ECU plugs that would be attached to your harness that would normally be coming out over there. In this case, I've got them set up to a little test harness that we can use in lieu of having an engine that obviously starts up. Okay. Right, so what we're going to be doing today, first of all, what we're going to do is we're going to go through the add-ons for this particular harness, how to install them so the customer knows how to do that. Once we've done that, then what we're going to do is we're going to jump into the testing procedure. So I've got my little list down over there of everything that we are going to go through. And then once that's done, that's pretty much complete and hopefully you know exactly what to do from there. So let's jump into the explanation of the add-ons that are possible with this particular harness. So this setup you see here will work on a standard 1G FE, straight plug-in, nothing added on. In this case, and what I normally recommend, whatever the setup is, the customer is going to have a Bosch wideband sensor able to plug directly in. Now, how do these work? Obviously, we don't want you to be cutting, chopping, changing anything. We set it up so you guys could actually return the car completely to standard, plug your old ECU back in, and away you go. So what we've done is, in our little patch over there, we've obviously worked out pins and locations in these ECU connectors that are not used by the ECU, and we're using these to pass signals through. So you can see on the end of here, these are completely terminated with ECU terminals. They also label to tell you exactly where they go. So you'll see this says 2817, 2815. So what does that mean? Basically, that's a 22 pin plug, that's a 28 pin plug, that's a 24 pin plug, and that's a 31 pin plug. So we've labeled them so you know exactly where to put them in. So what you need to do is basically unplug this. You'll see there's a little secondary lock. Use a screwdriver to push out, and then you can push these terminals directly into the place where they go. Okay, so how to read them? With the clip at the top, looking where the wire comes in, the top right one over there, that's number 1, and it goes 1 and it goes across, and then the second row starts and then it goes across, and the third row starts and it goes across. Okay, so that's 1, that could be 8, then it'll be 9, then say 16, then 17, and then 24, however particularly that plug that works. Okay, now you'll notice there's a little further down, we've got another wire over here. So obviously these need a 12 volt supply. So how do we get that? Now, if you look inside your ECU boxes, you'll see over here is what we call a little black junction connector. Not all the wires are joined together, but these two top ones over here, so 1 and 2, that sensor 12 volts, so that's the one we're using. Now you can see it's a bit shorter, so why is that? What we've basically done is we've designed this harness to become part of the body harness, okay? So what that means is, if you look under the ECU box there, you'll see there's a little grommet over there. You can make a tiny slit in there and you can basically push these wires in through. They come up over there, plug into the 28 pin plug. Now this one, if you lift up this white frame, which you can see here, there's a little, you can use a little screwdriver there, pry that up over there, pry that up over there, and that whole white frame with all these plugs in here, these body plugs will lift up. And what you can also do if you want is unbolt the ECU box there, and on the other side there, lift this up, push that little grommet through there, and it'll give you lots of access to work with, okay? But you're going to push these through, plug these in, and this one is going to go underneath this plug, and it is actually labeled as black 8. Okay, so it's black plug pin 8. All right, and again, same scenario. On the plug that goes underneath here, that's the one you're going to work with. Top right is number 1, so it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then 7 and 8. Now, because obviously it's the inverse of this one over here. That's why it looks weird, but yeah, follow those instructions and you'll get the powers correct. Okay, so what happens then? Obviously the rest of the harness is going to come. You can follow along your engine harness over here, which runs up along the wing over there. You can run it behind the battery along the firewall over there, and then the plug will end up over there, which will then plug into your wideband lambda, which will be in your exhaust over there. Okay, so that's super nice and simple. And what it means is this retains as part of the body harness. So if you ever wanted to remove the engine, you can unplug the lambda sensor there. You can unplug your two plugs over there. You can pull your entire engine harness off, and you don't have to depin or disconnect this in any shape or form. So basically, again, it becomes part of the body section of the harness. All right, so that's your wideband sensor over there. Right, one that comes with every patch harness, and this is what we call the temp wire. Now the reason that is because our MPX analog device requires its own separate temperature sensor from the one that's already on the block in order to read temperature. Now, again, exactly the same scenario. You can see we've got an ECU terminal in there. It's labeled as 28 pin 7. So in this case, you see my little red wire down here. It's going into 28 pin 7. So clearly there was no wire in there before. And again, same scenario. You're basically going to bring it up through this grommet, up and then into the plug like that. And again, this will form part of the body harness. Okay. Now this can be attached to any temperature sensor. The MPX device underneath there literally can be calibrated to any temp sensor, so you don't have to have a specific one. Just grab any one you can find that's going to work for your application. All right, now then, if the 1G is like the 2JZ, GE, VVT-i, there's usually a second port for a coolant temp sensor that's kind of a legacy item. So remember the 1G, you had the 1G GTE and the 1G without the actual VVT-i, the early ones. So there very well might be a coolant temperature sensor port on the engine that's just blanked off, and it's a legacy item left over from the earlier cars, okay? I haven't confirmed that yet, but there might be. Otherwise, you can fit any temperature sensor in the coolant pipes, okay? If you fit one in the coolant pipes, you might find that it becomes with two wires, because obviously if you had a silicone hose there to a metal section there with a temp sensor and then silicone there, there's no earth for the sensor. If that is the case, all you got to do is run the one wire from the sensor just to the block, bolt it to the ring terminal to the block. That'll give you your earth, and then your other one will run straight to our wire that we provide you there, which is clearly labeled as temp. All right. So in this case, that's all the customer's opting for because he's not having a turbo application. But what we can do is we can also put a Mac boost valve in if you want, and we do a sub harness including the Mac boost valve. Very similar setup to that, except that becomes part of the engine harness, not the body harness. Again, it gets a 12-volt supply from the black plug over there, so that is all sorted and rectified. And then it runs in your harness to where you're going to put your Mac boost valve. Okay, so what else can you add? Well, we've added the functionality to add in a fuel pressure and an oil pressure sensor. Okay, so if you do want to add those in, again, we can make you a harness. That will form part of the body harness as well. We have a 5 volts and a sensor ground available here to add those two sensors on if you want. All right, so again, we're not limiting you, but we're also meaning you don't have to cut anything. We can literally make your harness to add fuel and oil pressure, as well as the wideband, as well as a Mac boost valve. So if you went turbo, you could do that. Okay, right, so those are the add-ons that are going to go into this harness. As you can see, they do not require any cutting or any changing of anything at all. They're working with all the existing plugs that are already there. We're just utilizing spaces in those plugs that are not utilized by the IS200. Okay, right, so that's that. We've gone through the layout. We've gone through that. We've gone how to install everything. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go away for a second, pop back, and then we'll start doing the testing. So bear with me a second and we'll be back. Right, so now we're going to be ready for the testing of the harness. So I'm going to go through exactly what we're going to do as part of the testing, and then we're going to jump straight into it. So first thing we're going to test is the ambient temperature or outside temperature, right? Our little MPX analog device, what it does is if you don't have that signal coming inside the car, what it'll do is it'll display an E for error or 2 dashes. What the device is going to do, it's going to transmit a constant 18 degrees. So it isn't sensed, unfortunately, but at least you don't get an E or the double dashes. Now, heads up, we are working on, it's taking a bit of time, but we are working on a device that converts CAN to MPX, or should I say we already have a CAN to MPX device, which we use for the 3UZ 6-speed ECUs. And so what we're trying to do is build up a CAN database that all the ECU manufacturers are happy with. that we can then implement. So in the future, we will actually be able to give you ambient temperature because we'll be able to convert CAN to MPX. Now, there is a caveat with that. You do have to have the ability to sense the ambient temperature. Now, in these boxes, I currently already am feeding the ambient temperature sensor to the ECU. I do set it as pre-intercooler temperature sensor, so your systems will be ready, even these ones, to accept the CAN converter device when that becomes available. So you guys can upgrade to that later on. So yeah, we are working on it, and as soon as we get any closer, we'll let you guys know. Right, next up is going to be check engine light. So that's going to be simply a case of looking at the dash, and we should see the check engine light in the corner over there. Right, next up is going to be oil pressure light. So what I've got the wire that normally goes to the oil pressure switch inside the 1G. So what we're going to do is we're going to earth that out, and we're going to see our oil light come on. Next up, we're going to be looking at the coolant temp. Now, sorry, I did skip the alternator light. Basically, our little MPX device senses battery voltage, and if it drops below 11.8 volts, it will activate the alternator light. Only problem is, I've got a battery charger on, so I don't run the battery flat during the testing. So obviously our voltage is going to remain quite high and not drop below 11.8. So you won't see it work, but obviously I test these before they go out, so I know that they do work. Right, moving on to the coolant temp sensor. So what's going to happen as soon as I turn the key on, your coolant temp sensor is going to shoot to straight hot. Okay, why does it do this? It's a safety feature built into our MPX converter. So remember, coolant temp is transmitted via MPX data, which is like an early CAN bus. And so that's why you have the temp wire that you need to fit in, otherwise your temperature gauge is not going to work, okay? And then if it senses that there's no connection, it shoots the temperature gauge right to hot. It's to grab your attention and say, hey, something is wrong, you need to rectify it, okay? So that's how that's going to work. What I'm going to do basically is I'm just going to ground out my temp wire, which mimics your temp wire over there, and you're going to see the temperature gauge is going to shoot down. And as soon as I let go, it's going to shoot all the way to the top because it detects that nothing is connected. Right, so that's coolant temp sensor, or yeah, the coolant temp. Then what we're going to do is we're going to test some of the sensors. So I've got the actual coolant temp sensor from your engine in there, so we're going to unplug that and make sure that that is working. We've also got the IS200 intake air temperature sensor, so we're going to unplug that and make sure that is working as well. Okay. Once we've done that, then I'm going to move over to a few things that we've set up that are a little bit more complex. So things like the air conditioning and the ACIS system. So I'm going to go through exactly how they work. How we set them up on the ECU in case anything ever changes, and obviously how they should work when they get into your vehicle. So that's going to be the air conditioning and the ACIS. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to feed a signal over to the ECU to imitate like a crank and a cam signal. That's going to cause the RPM to go up, so we're going to see that on the dash, so we make sure that that is working all correctly. Okay, and then I'm going to show you that the drive-by-wire works correctly. Okay. Right, so let's get into the testing. First thing we want to do is obviously go around and turn on the ignition. So really straightforward. As you say, it all plugs in directly. So I'm going to hit that up, put the key on, and there you can see all the relays clicking and the drive-by-wire actually buzzing into action already. All right, so first up we're going to do ambient temperature. So I'm just going to scoot around over here. And as you can see there, it says 18 degrees. So that's exactly what we're looking for. It will stay at 18 degrees as discussed earlier. Next up, we're going to come over and we're going to look at our check engine light. And as you can see in the corner there, spot on. So that is working over there. Now, in relation to the check engine light, because it's a standalone ECU, you obviously set up exactly how it works. Okay. What I mean by that is if you go over to your settings on the left here in your software, you can open up engine protection. You can open up check engine light. And basically what we've got it set up so far to show a check engine light if there's an error with is the IAT sensor, coolant temp sensor, and map sensor. You can add the wideband oxygen sensor to that as well. You can also add knocking, so if it detects knocking, it'll set the check engine light for you. We've also set the report a failure of drive-by-wire. So if there's an issue with the drive-by-wire, it'll be there. Okay, if you add a fuel pressure sensor, you can also report an error with the fuel pressure sensor as well. Okay, so we keep it nice and simple for you guys, but obviously as you add on, you can add more reasons for the check engine light to come on. Right, so that's the check engine light. So oil pressure light, as I said, I'm just going to earth out my oil pressure switch wire, which is that one over there. And as I do, you can see in the corner there, I've got the red oil pressure light. So that, and if I let go, it goes straight off. Okay, so that's working exactly as it should do, no problem again. Again, the reason is that MPX is used to transmit oil light over there, so we have to have the device to do that. Okay, next up is going to be the coolant temp. So as you can see over there, if you haven't seen already, the coolant temp gauge is shot to full hot. All right. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to earth out this wire, which is effectively your temp wire that's going to be in there. And as I do that, I should see the temperature gauge start to come down. So you can see that comes down. As I lift it off, shoots straight back up again. Okay, so that means that 28 pin 7 over there is connected directly to the MPX analog device, and it is transmitting the coolant temp, so I'm super happy with that. Right, next up we're going to test those two sensors. So again, I'm referring to the coolant temp and the intake air temperature sensor. So first thing I want to do is show you that the coolant temp and the IAT are reading temperatures, okay, because they are plugged in. So to test that obviously they are wired correctly, I'm going to disconnect the coolant temp sensor. So that's disconnected. And you see there the coolant temp goes to -30. All right, plug it back in again. Plug it back in, and it goes straight to 21, 22. Right, so we're going to do exactly the same thing with the IAT. This one's a bit of a tough one to disconnect though, so just bear with me a second. Right, so that's the IAT sensor, disconnected, and you'll see straight away IAT has gone to -30, so those are my fail-safe values, and that we set up in the ECU. And as I plug it back in again, see there, it goes to 22, 23 degrees. Obviously, I've been holding it in my hand, so I've heated up the sensor a little bit there. Right, so that is the coolant temp and intake air temperature sensor. Right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to shoot over to the AC setup, and I'm going to explain to you exactly how we do that. Now, to give a bit of background, the way the IS200 works in terms of sensors on the vehicle to control the AC, it's very simple. There's a pressure switch in the front. Now that goes closed or goes to ground when the pressure is just right. If it's too high, it opens up. If it goes too low, it opens up, okay? Our little MPX device over there, right, that gives out a ground signal, okay, when you press the AC switch inside the vehicle. So how do we control that in the ECU? All right, so if you have a look here, you'll see I've allocated a parametric output number 2. It's called ACMG, or AC magnetic clutch. And what I've basically done is I've set two conditions, because remember, we don't want the AC to come on if the pressure is too high or too low, but we also want the ECU to come on when we press the button. So what I've done basically is switch 1 is the pressure switch, switch 2 is the AC request switch, okay? So again, I've said the switch 1 needs to be on, so 100 is on, 0 is off, and switch 2 needs to be 100, and that will be on, okay? So at this moment in time, I've bridged the pressure switch, so it's always going to ground, so that is active. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pop over to the AC switch over here. You can actually hear the relay clicking in the background over there. Right, so if you're in your car and you've got the ignition on and you press that AC button, the magnetic clutch relay will kick in and it'll then turn on your AC compressor, okay? If the pressure drops too high or too low, it will cut it off, all right? Okay, so my battery's going a little bit flat, so I'm just going to cut now, and then we're going to come back and do the ACIS after I charge the battery for a bit. So bear with me a second. Right, guys, so we're back again, and we're going to move into the ACIS system. So to help explain this, I'm going to go through what the ACIS system is, how it works, and when it is activated. So first thing I'm going to do is pop over to our document from Toyota. All right, Toyota/Lexus. Now this is for the IS200. This is the ACIS system, and it describes exactly how it works. Now, obviously, this section is how it describes how it actually moves the valve, which shortens or lengthens the intake runners. But what we're interested in is over here. So this is how electronically it is controlled. So there's a few criteria that are set. So one is the throttle valve opening angle. Next up is the engine RPM, or engine speed. Okay, so if you have a look at the top here, it says IACV closed, or vacuum solenoid valve on. Okay, now this is going to be when the output should be activated in this sketched out area over here. These blocks at the top here, that is when you don't want it to be activated. Okay, so as you can see from their diagram, what they're doing is if the TPS is below 60% and any RPM, that should be activated. All right. If the TPS is above 60% and it's between 2,500 and 4,900 RPM, that's that section over there, so it should be activated. Okay, so how do we control this setup inside the ECU? Let's jump straight into that. So it took a bit of work to get it right, but I'm going to go through exactly how we do it. Now again, this is on ECUMaster. Other ECUs will vary, but this is how we did it on this one over here. So we've used a parametric output, so that gives us the ability to have conditions on when it's set. Now on the ECUMaster Black, only the first parametric output allows you to do 3 conditions to be met for its thing. The rest of them, so the parametric output 2 and so on and so forth, only allow 2 conditions, so do bear that in mind. All right, so as we saw from the graph, we need an RPM based set of conditions. So the first variable is RPM, and it is equal or greater than 2,500. Okay, so if we go back to our section over there, that's going to be that section over there. So as long as it's above that, it's going to turn on. All right, now we need to turn it back off again when it gets to 4,900. So what we're going to do is use a second variable. We're going to say and, okay, so both conditions have to be met. We're going to say RPM is equal or lower than 4,900 RPM. So that gives us our little twin section in the middle here, right? So if the RPM is above 2,500 and below 4,900, the vacuum solenoid valve will turn on. That covers that. Now we've got to sort out the 60% scenario. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, we did a little bit of work with Greg over at RRR and we worked this out. So what we've done is we're using a virtual parametric output. Now the reason we've done that is because we need to put an or. So in other words, it has to meet these 2 conditions, or the throttle must be below 60%. So what we've done is we've used a virtual parametric output. We've made the variable TPS, throttle position, and we've said that it's got to be equal or lower than 60, so 60%, okay? So if the TPS is equal or below 60%, then this virtual parametric output will become active, okay? So what we then do is we say or, okay? So again, these 2 are and, so they both have to be met. This one is or, so it's these 2 or that can be met. So is equal to or greater than, now this case it's 100. The reason it's 100 is because a virtual parametric output can either be off or on, 0 being off, 100 being on. So as we stipulated here, if the TPS is below 60%, that will turn the virtual parametric output to on. So what we said is either the RPM needs to be between 2,500 or 4,900, or the TPS must be lower than 60%. Okay, so that sorts that problem out. So now we can replicate this entirely, right? TPS is below 60%, it'll always be on. If the TPS is above 60%, but the RPM is at 3,000, it'll also be on, okay? So that sorts out that little square over there. All right, so we'll pop back over to here. So hopefully you understand that. Not to worry if you don't, but obviously it's useful for your tuner if you want to send him this so he knows exactly how everything works. Now, this is not necessarily the best way to make the most power, but this is the way that Toyota did it. So what we'd like to do is get you on a good base to work from, okay? You can obviously lower the throttle position, you can higher the throttle position, you can change the RPM, you can do whatever you want. So if you want to sit with your tuner and work out what's going to give you the best power, feel free to do so, and that is what you can change over there in relation to that other table, and you guys can work out between yourselves what is the most efficient way to do it to make the most power. Okay, now that will change obviously whether you're turbo, supercharged, or whatever, etc, etc. All right, so that is the ACIS setup. So to see it in action, I will quickly pop over here and you will see that my little LED for ACIS, because obviously it's a 12 volt and ground, ACIS, that is lit up. Now that is perfectly fine because again, RPM is at 0 and TPS is below 60%. So again, that is on. Now then, if I move the TPS, so you can see the LED over there, if I move the TPS and we get to 60%, LED goes off. So again, we're meeting those conditions. So in other words, where we are at this moment in time, if you look at that graph, is we're at 0 RPM, but we're above 60%. So we're on that line there. So that's a condition where the vacuum solenoid valve will turn off, okay? If we can get the RPM to 3,000, no matter where we move the TPS, that LED would stay on in its entirety, okay? Right, so that is the ACIS system. It's a little bit long-winded, I know, but I want to give you guys a good explanation as to exactly how that works. So next up, we're going to do TAC. So what we want to do now is we're going to feed an RPM signal to the ECU. And when we do that, we're going to see the rev counter on the dash actually start working. So bear with me a second while I set up my little device here. Because again, I need 2 hands to do that. I need to press the button there. And let's push that back into there. Right, fantastic. So that is going to work just fine. So again, I'm going to need my 2 hands. So bear with me a second while I do that. And I'm just going to then activate the signal. Okay. Right, so you can see at the bottom there, it's actually synchronized, which is weird because it shouldn't do, because the signals are completely incorrect. But you can also see now that our injectors are all lighting up there like it's firing. So what RPM are we seeing? Let's pop over to our tab over there, 1,723 RPM. If I pop over to the dash, you can see there it's just below 2,000 RPM. Okay, so that's absolutely fine. So we do have an RPM signal over there. So what I'm actually going to do now is I'm going to turn the RPM to above 2,500. So bear with me a second while I do that. Right, so now you can see our RPM is at 2,757. So now we're in that bracket where the ACIS shouldn't turn off, even if I took the throttle above 60%. So let's do that now quickly. See, I've opened the throttle all the way, and you can see the ACIS light is not turning off. All right, if I pop it back to below, just pop it down, there you go, probably about 1,500 RPM. And then if I go ahead and open up the throttle, as you can see I'm doing there, once at above 60%, you see the light goes off. Okay, so that's fantastic. There you go, and you can actually hear the fuel pump relay in the background there clicking off, because as soon as it picks up a signal, it will do that. Right, so that is the tack. And then we're going to move on to the drive-by-wire. Okay, so again, nice and simple. You can actually see it's going, but I'm going to show you now. There you go. Okay. Right, so that's working as we expect it to. And as usual, like I say to all the guys, you must do the drive-by-wire calibration tool when you put this into your car for the first time, because it takes the voltages from the TPS, which are adjustable, so you need to do it for your individual throttle body every single time, okay? Now, also that we do, and I've been caught out, and people get caught out all the time about, is obviously you set everything up, you press the accelerator pedal, which is the lever over there, and nothing happens. Why does that happen? So, what you can sometimes miss out on is if you go to your drive-by-wire settings on the side here and you look down here at characteristics number 1. So this is a table to tell you exactly where the throttle position is. So remember, in this case, the pedal is the throttle position, okay? Our actual TPS or blade inside there is plugged into analog 1, right? So therefore, you're telling it at what throttle position, so where your pedal is, versus engine RPM, at what percentage the actual throttle should be open. So you see at 0, we're actually opening at 3. At 6.5% of throttle opening, we're actually opening the throttle 4%, okay? And as you go along, you'll see the numbers change, and you can change it based on RPM, okay? Now, obviously, when you have an original cable setup, it's not perfectly linear, okay? You could make this perfectly linear, but it's gonna drive really weird. So these numbers here to match that, but that's something you can set up with your tuner, and you can go from there. Now, what we can also do is you don't only have one set of characteristics, you can have 2 set of characteristics. So why would you need that? Right, you know, sometimes on these IS200s you have like a snow button, and when you press it, the throttle only opens 50%, even though you open up the actual accelerator all the way. That's what that can be used for. So switch number 3 is still open on the ECU. So if you did want to put in a switch to do that, by all means, that is technically possible. I've never seen anyone do it, but it's just there. You guys can use it if you want. Okay, so you do have the ability to have 2 throttle maps based on the settings that you want to use. Okay, so that's the drive-by-wire, but just make sure that your characteristics 1 actually has values in, because if it's got 0, and what I'll do is I'm just going to demonstrate for you now. If I put 0 in there and I open the throttle, it's doing nothing, because obviously it is literally saying that no matter what throttle position, you should open the TPS 0. Okay, so that's something that catches guys out, so do always check that after you do the calibration. All right, so that's pretty much it from our side now over here. So I'm going to shoot now. We're going to get this all boxed up for the customer so that he can get it plugged in and off he goes. But if you guys do have any questions, as per usual, feel free to comment down below. I try to get them as much as I can, or message us on the Facebook at Phoenix Engine Management, okay? We can get you there. And if you need any more information or pricing, please message us. Obviously, we'll go through the options with you, let you decide on exactly what you want to go with, and then obviously we can tailor the quote for you there. But thanks for watching, guys. I've got to get onto a couple of link ECUs now, so I'm going to do that. Thanks for watching, and we will see you again later. Bye-bye.